Hello everyone, I'm the storyteller, and I'm here to guide you through tonight's journey. I know many of you use these videos to help you unwind or drift off to sleep, so before we begin, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and let your mind relax. The old farmhouse at the edge of town had been abandoned for years, its windows broken and its walls overgrown with ivy. The locals said it was haunted, that strange sounds could be heard at night and lights flickered in the attic window, even though there was no electricity running to the house. The place was mostly avoided, except by curious thrill-seekers like Daniel, who had an unquenchable fascination with haunted places. Daniel had heard the stories about the farmhouse since he was a kid, and now, as a young adult, he decided it was time to finally explore it. One cold, misty evening, he parked his car by the old fence and made his way to the front door, which hung open like a gaping mouth. The inside was just as eerie as he had imagined. Dust coated every surface and the smell of decay hung in the air. His flashlight flickered as he moved through the rooms, casting shadows on the cracked walls. Each step echoed and the floorboards creaked under his weight. He wandered through the empty rooms until he found the stairs that led up to the attic. The attic door was slightly ajar, and a strange feeling washed over him as he reached for the handle. The locals had said this attic held something sinister, but he shook off his nerves and pushed the door open. The room was filled with old furniture draped in sheets, but what caught his attention was an antique mirror leaning against the far wall. It was tall, with an intricately carved wooden frame, and its surface was covered in a thick layer of dust. Curious, Daniel walked over to it and wiped the dust away, revealing his reflection. He stared at himself for a moment, then noticed something strange. The reflection was slightly off. It seemed darker, and there was a shadowy figure standing just behind him in the mirror. He whipped around, but no one was there. His heart pounded as he looked back at the mirror, and his reflection now seemed normal. He took a deep breath, convincing himself it was just a trick of the light. He turned to leave the attic, but as he reached the door, he heard a faint whisper. "Stay." The voice was soft, almost pleading. He froze, his hand on the doorknob, listening. But the attic was silent. With a shiver, he stepped out of the room and closed the door behind him. That night, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the shadowy figure standing behind him in the mirror, its eyes dark and empty. He tried to tell himself it was just his imagination, but the image felt too real. The next morning he woke up exhausted and decided to go about his day, hoping to forget about the farmhouse. But strange things began to happen. His reflection in the bathroom mirror seemed to move independently, shifting slightly when he wasn't looking. He would catch glimpses of a shadowy figure in his peripheral vision, only for it to vanish when he turned his head. Each night the dreams grew worse. He was back in the attic, standing in front of the mirror, and the figure was closer, its hand reaching out toward him. He would wake up in a cold sweat, feeling as though he were being watched. One night, unable to sleep, he decided to return to the farmhouse. He needed to confront whatever was haunting him. Armed with a flashlight and his phone, he drove back to the edge of town and made his way to the attic once more. The mirror was there waiting for him, its surface shimmering in the dim light. He walked up to it, his heart pounding, and looked into his reflection. The shadowy figure was there again, but this time, it wasn't just standing behind him, it was grinning, a twisted, malevolent smile spreading across its face. Before he could react, he felt a cold hand grip his shoulder. He tried to turn, but his body wouldn't respond. In the mirror, he watched as the shadow pulled him closer, its dark eyes gleaming with a sinister light. He felt himself being dragged into the mirror, his reflection twisting and warping as he was pulled deeper into the darkness. He screamed, but no sound came out. The last thing he saw was his own terrified face, distorted in the mirror, before everything went black. The next morning, the locals noticed something strange. The farmhouse, abandoned for decades, now had a new decoration in the attic. A large mirror, its surface dark and cloudy, with faint scratches on the glass that almost looked like handprints. And if you dared to look into the mirror, you might just catch a glimpse of Daniel, trapped behind the glass, his face frozen in a silent scream, reaching out to anyone who would listen, but no one ever did. In the dense woods outside a small town, there was a cabin that everyone had forgotten. Overgrown by weeds and hidden behind twisted trees, it seemed as though the forest itself was trying to conceal its existence. Locals claimed the cabin was cursed. Those who ventured too close would feel an unnatural coldness and hear voices that didn't belong to the living. Max had heard the stories all his life. He was a nature photographer with a taste for the unusual, so he set out one late afternoon to find the forgotten cabin, determined to capture its mystery on camera. As he entered the woods, shadows lengthened and a thick fog began to creep in, but Max pressed on, undeterred, his camera slung over his shoulder. It wasn't long before he spotted the cabin through the trees. Its roof sagged, and its wooden walls were weathered and rotting. Yet, as Max approached, he felt an odd sensation, as if the cabin itself was watching him. He pushed open the creaking door and stepped inside. Dust floated in the air, and a strange smell filled the space, a mix of damp earth and something metallic. The floorboards groaned beneath him as he explored, snapping photos of the abandoned furniture and the strange markings carved into the walls. They looked like symbols, but nothing he recognized. At the far end of the cabin, he noticed a small door partially hidden behind an old, dusty curtain. Curious, Max pulled the curtain aside and opened the door. It led to a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Against his better judgment, he flicked on his flashlight and slowly made his way down the stairs. The air grew colder with each step, and the walls felt damp and close around him. At the bottom of the staircase, he found himself in a small basement room with a low ceiling. Strange objects lined the walls. Old dolls, rusted tools, and animal bones arranged in strange patterns. But what caught his attention was a large mirror standing in the corner of the room, covered with a dusty cloth. Max felt a chill run down his spine as he approached the mirror. Slowly, he reached out and pulled the cloth away. The mirror's surface was tarnished and cloudy, but he could just make out his reflection, and something else. Behind him, in the mirror, stood a shadowy figure. Its face was indistinct, but its eyes were bright and piercing, locked onto him with a gaze that seemed to go right through him. He spun around, but there was no one there. Heart pounding, he turned back to the mirror. The figure was gone, but the room felt different. A soft whispering sound filled the air, echoing around him. "Help us. Free us," the voices murmured, overlapping in a haunting chorus. Max backed away, feeling as though he was intruding on something ancient and dangerous. Just as he reached the staircase to leave, he noticed a small, leather-bound book lying on a table near the mirror. Against his better judgment, he picked it up and flipped through the pages. The book was filled with notes, describing strange rituals and summoning spells. But the last page held a warning. "Do not look into the mirror at midnight." Suddenly, he heard footsteps above him, slow and heavy, as though someone or something was moving around in the cabin. His heart raced as he realized he was no longer alone. He put the book back and quickly climbed the stairs, only to find the cabin's main room empty. He took a deep breath, telling himself it was his imagination, and turned to leave. But as he approached the door, he saw it. The mirror, the same one from the basement, was now standing in the middle of the room, directly facing him. He hadn't moved it, and there was no way it could have been brought upstairs so quickly. His hands shook as he looked into the mirror. At first, he saw only his own pale face, but slowly the shadowy figure began to appear behind him again. This time, he could make out more details: a twisted grin, hollow eyes, and long bony fingers reaching toward him. "Stay," it whispered, its voice echoing around the room. Terrified, Max bolted for the door, but it wouldn't open. No matter how hard he pulled, it felt as though something was holding it shut. He turned back to the mirror, and to his horror, he saw not one, but multiple shadowy figures standing behind him, their faces twisted in agony. "Stay with us," they chanted, their voices overlapping, filling his head with whispers. Desperate, Max grabbed a chair and swung it at the mirror, shattering it into pieces. For a moment the whispers stopped, and an eerie silence filled the room. He took a deep breath, thinking he was finally free. But then he felt a cold hand on his shoulder. He turned, and there was no one there. And yet, in each shard of broken glass on the floor, he saw his own terrified face, surrounded by the figures, their hands reaching out, pulling him closer into their dark world. When the townsfolk found Max's camera near the edge of the woods the next day, they assumed he'd simply gotten lost. But the photos on his camera told a different story. Each image showed him in the cabin, surrounded by shadows, his face growing more and more terrified with each shot. And in the final photo, he was gone. Only the cabin remained, its door slightly ajar, as if waiting for the next visitor. Hollowmore Lake had a dark reputation. The locals whispered stories of people who had vanished near its shores, and some even claimed that they'd seen a pale figure drifting along the water at night. No one dared to swim in it or even visit the lake after sunset. For years, Clara had heard the rumors but brushed them off as local superstition. She was a paranormal investigator with her own online channel, and Hollowmore Lake seemed like the perfect place to shoot her next episode. Determined to find something she could record, she packed her camera and flashlight and set off one evening, just as the sun was dipping below the horizon. By the time she arrived, the sky was dark, and a thick mist hovered over the water. The lake was eerily still, surrounded by tall, silent trees. Clara set up her camera on the shore, taking a few shots of the mist-covered water. As she looked through the viewfinder, something caught her eye. A faint white shape floating near the middle of the lake. At first, she thought it was a trick of the light, but then it started moving toward her. Squinting through the mist, she could just make out the shape of a woman, her long hair trailing in the water and her pale face barely visible. Clara's heart pounded, but she was too fascinated to look away. She adjusted her camera to zoom in, hoping to capture the mysterious figure. Through the lens, she could see the woman's face more clearly now. Her eyes were hollow, dark as the depths of the lake, and her mouth was twisted into a sorrowful expression. The figure began drifting closer, her movements slow and deliberate, as if she were gliding just beneath the water's surface. Clara took a deep breath and called out, "Who are you? Why are you here?" The figure paused, tilting her head as if she had heard Clara. Then, in a voice that seemed to echo from somewhere deep within the lake, she whispered, "Help me." Clara felt a chill run down her spine, but she steadied herself and asked, "What do you need help with?" The woman's hollow eyes locked onto her, and the air grew colder. "I can't rest, not until they know what happened to me." As the figure drifted even closer, Clara could see that her dress was tattered, and her hands were reaching toward her, long fingers almost translucent. She fought the urge to back away, determined to get answers. "What happened to you?" Clara asked, her voice barely a whisper. The woman's face twisted with sorrow, and her voice filled the air once more. "I was lost here, left to drown, alone in the dark. I have waited so long." Suddenly the water began to ripple around the woman, as if something were moving beneath the surface. Clara glanced at her camera to make sure it was still recording, her heart racing as the mist thickened. She realized with a cold, sinking feeling that the figure was no longer just in the lake. She was now standing on the shore, only a few feet away. Clara took a step back, but the figure raised a hand as if pleading, "Please, take my hand." Every instinct told her to run, but something held her in place. Slowly, almost without realizing it, Clara extended her hand toward the ghostly woman. As their fingers brushed, Clara felt an intense cold rush through her body, freezing her to the core. Images flooded her mind, dark water, the feeling of sinking, hands pushing her down, the muffled sound of laughter. She was seeing the woman's final moments, trapped in the lake, abandoned to her fate. Clara gasped and pulled her hand back, breaking the connection. She stumbled away, her breaths coming in short, panicked gasps as the woman's voice echoed in her mind. "Don't leave me. Don't leave me alone again." Without another word, Clara turned and ran, her camera forgotten on the shore. She didn't stop running until she reached her car, and even then, she could still hear the ghost's voice, soft and sorrowful, fading into the night. The next day, Clara went back to retrieve her camera. She was horrified to find that the device was soaked and completely ruined, as if it had been submerged in water. But the memory card was intact. When she uploaded the footage later that night, her blood ran cold. The video showed the misty lake, the faint outline of the ghostly woman, but then, near the end, the camera had captured something terrifying. There was a moment where the figure was standing right in front of the lens, her hollow eyes staring into the camera, her face twisted in pain, and then, just before the footage cut off, the woman's hand reached out, brushing against the screen, as if she were trying to reach through it. Clara never returned to Hollowmore Lake, but sometimes, late at night, when she watched the footage, she could almost hear the woman's voice whispering from the depths of the lake. "Help me. Don't leave me." And she knew deep down that the ghost was still waiting. Briarwood Forest was notorious among the townsfolk for its strange occurrences. It was said that anyone who wandered too deep into the woods could hear whispers calling their name, leading them to lose their way. Many had gone missing over the years, but no one dared to investigate further. That is, until Lily, a young journalist with a knack for uncovering the truth, decided to delve into the legends for her latest article. Armed with a notepad, a flashlight, and an unwavering determination, Lily set off one crisp autumn morning. The leaves crunched underfoot, and the air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. As she stepped deeper into the forest, the sunlight began to fade, casting long shadows between the trees. After an hour of wandering, she came across an old moss-covered path that seemed to beckon her. Curiosity piqued, she followed the path, which wound deeper into the forest, leading her away from the familiar trails. As she walked, the sounds of the forest faded, replaced by an eerie silence that made her skin prickle. Suddenly, she heard it. A soft whisper, almost like a breeze rustling through the leaves. "Lily," it called, the voice sounding familiar, yet distant. She paused, her heart racing. "Who's there?" she shouted, but only silence answered. Pushing her fear aside, she continued along the path, determined to find the source of the voice. It seemed to lead her, coaxing her further into the woods. The whispering grew louder, echoing around her. "Lily, come play with us." She stopped in her tracks, her breath hitching in her throat. The voice was not alone. She could hear others, a chorus of whispers surrounding her, enticing her to follow. They sounded like children's voices, filled with laughter and mischief. "Join us, Lily. We're waiting for you." Despite her better judgment, Lily felt an inexplicable urge to follow the voices. She stumbled forward, the path becoming less defined. The trees loomed overhead, their branches twisting and curling like skeletal fingers. The whispers grew more insistent, pulling her deeper into the heart of Briarwood Forest. Finally, she reached a clearing where the whispers faded into a haunting silence. In the center stood a dilapidated playground, the swings swaying gently as if someone had just been playing on them. The slide was rusty, and the merry-go-round was overgrown with weeds. It was a ghostly scene, frozen in time. Lily stepped into the clearing, her heart pounding. She felt a chill creep over her, as if the very air was alive with something sinister. Suddenly, she caught sight of movement out of the corner of her eye. Turning quickly, she saw them, children, pale and translucent, standing at the edge of the clearing, watching her with wide, unblinking eyes. "Play with us, Lily," one of the children said, stepping forward. His voice was sweet, but had an underlying tone of sadness that sent shivers down her spine. "We've been waiting for someone like you." "Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "We are the lost. another child replied, their smile unnaturally wide. "We come here to play, but no one can hear us. Until now." Fear washed over Lily as she realized what they meant. The townsfolk's warnings flashed in her mind. The missing children, the whispers in the woods. She took a step back, but the children moved closer, their eyes gleaming with an unsettling light. "Don't be scared," a girl said, her voice sweet like honey. "We just want to play. Forever." The air around her thickened, and the whispers returned, swirling around her like a storm. "Stay with us, Lily. Don't leave us." In a panic, Lily turned and ran, the laughter of the children echoing behind her, mixing with their haunting calls. "Lily, come back. Play with us." The forest closed in around her, branches scratching at her arms and face as she stumbled through the underbrush, desperately searching for the path. The whispers became a cacophony, drowning out her thoughts and urging her to stop, to turn back. But she pushed on, adrenaline fueling her escape. Finally, she burst through the trees and found herself on the familiar trail leading back to town. She didn't stop running until she reached her car, slamming the door behind her. Panting heavily, she fumbled for her keys, her hands shaking. The whispers still echoed in her mind, lingering like a bad dream. Lily drove away from Briarwood Forest, vowing never to return. But even in the safety of her home, she could still hear them, those ghostly children, whispering her name, begging her to come back. Weeks passed, and though she tried to put the experience behind her, the whispers haunted her dreams. One night, she woke up to the sound of soft giggles, echoing from the shadows of her room. Heart racing, she sat up and looked around, but there was nothing there. As she settled back into bed, she heard it again, clearer this time. "Lily, come play with us." In a panic, she grabbed her phone to record the sounds, desperate to capture the voices that tormented her. As she hit record, she heard a faint rustling from the corner of her room. Turning her head, she froze as she saw the pale figures of the children standing at the foot of her bed, their eyes gleaming with anticipation. "Play with us, Lily. Forever." And as the whispers filled her room, she realized with horror that she had never truly escaped Briarwood Forest. In a quiet town nestled between rolling hills, there stood an old house on Maple Lane that had been abandoned for decades. Locals avoided it, claiming that strange sounds could be heard at night, and shadows danced in the windows when no one was home. The house's reputation was that of a haunted place, where the past lingered like a thick fog. Emily, a curious college student with a passion for the supernatural, decided it was the perfect place for her next project. Armed with her camera and a notebook, she planned to investigate the house and document her findings. She arrived at Old Maple Lane one chilly evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting an eerie glow over the landscape. As she approached the house, its weathered facade loomed ominously against the darkening sky. The front door hung slightly ajar, creaking softly as the wind blew. Taking a deep breath, she stepped inside. The air was stale, thick with dust and neglect. Emily felt a shiver run down her spine, but she brushed it off as excitement. The interior was as she expected, peeling wallpaper, cobwebs draping the corners, and furniture shrouded in dust covers. As she explored room after room, she recorded her observations, noting the strange energy that seemed to pulse in the air around her. Suddenly, she heard it, a faint whisper echoing through the halls. "Help us." It was a soft, mournful sound that sent chills racing up her arms. Emily paused, her heart pounding in her chest. She turned her camera toward the source, capturing the dimly lit corridor ahead of her. "Hello?" she called, trying to sound brave. "Is anyone there?" No response came, but the whispering continued, growing louder. "Help us. Free us." Determined to uncover the truth, Emily followed the sound deeper into the house. It led her to a small, locked door at the end of the corridor. With a deep breath, she pulled out a bobby pin and jimmied the lock until it clicked open. The door creaked open to reveal a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. With her flashlight illuminating the way, Emily descended the stairs, her heart racing with anticipation and fear. The air grew colder, and the whispering grew more frantic, echoing off the stone walls. "Help us! Help us!" At the bottom, she found herself in a dimly lit cellar filled with old furniture and forgotten belongings. The walls were lined with strange symbols and drawings, as if someone had tried to ward off an unseen evil. In the center of the room stood an old mirror, its surface clouded with age. As Emily approached the mirror, she felt a pull, as if something was drawing her closer. She wiped the surface with her sleeve, revealing her reflection. And something else. Behind her, she saw shadowy figures lurking in the darkness, their forms indistinct yet undeniably present. "Who are you?" she gasped, spinning around, but the cellar was empty. Turning back to the mirror, she realized that the figures were still there, their faces now twisted in expressions of anguish. "We are trapped," one of the figures whispered, its voice chilling. "You must help us. Break the curse." Emily felt her heart race. "How?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Find the source of the darkness," the figure replied, pointing toward the mirror. "You must face it." Gathering her courage, Emily stepped closer to the mirror. As she stared into its depths, the room around her began to distort, swirling and bending like a dream. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening, as the shadows began to stretch toward her. Suddenly, she was pulled into the mirror, and everything went black. When Emily opened her eyes, she found herself in a different place. She was in the same cellar, but it felt alive with energy. The air crackled and the shadows danced along the walls, whispering her name. She realized she was no longer alone. The trapped souls surrounded her, their faces now clear. "Help us!" they cried, their voices a cacophony of desperation. "Free us from the darkness!" Emily's mind raced. She needed to understand what had bound these souls. She began to search the cellar, looking for clues among the symbols and drawings. One drawing caught her eye. It depicted a woman standing before the mirror, surrounded by shadows, with a pair of eyes watching from the dark. Realization struck her. This was a warning. The woman had been consumed by the darkness, leaving her spirit trapped within the mirror. Emily felt a sense of urgency. She had to find a way to break the curse. Gathering her strength, she turned to the mirror and shouted, "I release you. I break the curse." The shadows recoiled, their whispers turning to screams. The mirror began to crack, shattering the silence that had enveloped the room. With each fracture, the spirit surged forward, reaching for the light, for freedom. As the mirror shattered completely, a blinding light filled the cellar, and Emily felt herself being pulled back through the fragments of glass. She closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, she was back in the dim cellar, the mirror now a pile of glittering shards. The whispering had ceased, and the air was still. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, one by one, the shadows began to dissolve into the light, their faces now peaceful. Emily watched in awe as the spirits were freed, their whispers replaced with gratitude. "Thank you," a soft voice echoed through the now empty cellar. "You saved us." As the last shadow faded, Emily felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had faced the darkness and emerged victorious. But as she turned to leave, she noticed a single shard of the mirror lying at her feet, glinting in the dim light. Curiosity getting the better of her, she picked it up, but as she did, a chill ran through her, and she heard a final whisper echoing in her mind. "We will always be watching." With a shiver, Emily left the house, the weight of the experience heavy on her shoulders. Though she had freed the trapped souls, a part of the darkness remained with her, a reminder of the shadows that lingered in Old Maple Lane. Elmwood Cemetery was an old resting place, shrouded in mystery and whispers of the past. It was said that those who wandered its paths after dark would hear strange noises, rustling leaves, distant sobs, and sometimes even laughter. But one legend overshadowed the rest, the tale of the lurker, a shadowy figure said to roam the graves at night seeking something lost. Sarah, a young photographer with a keen interest in urban legends, decided to explore Elmwood Cemetery for herself. Armed with her camera and a flashlight, she planned to capture the eerie beauty of the tombstones and the haunting atmosphere of the place. She arrived just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the cemetery. As Sarah walked among the graves, the air grew colder and an unsettling silence enveloped her. She snapped pictures of the ornate headstones and crumbling statues, feeling a thrill at being in a place so steeped in history. But as darkness fell, an inexplicable unease settled in her stomach. Suddenly, a rustle echoed from the bushes nearby. Startled, Sarah pointed her flashlight in that direction, but all she saw were the leaves stirring in the wind. "It's just my imagination," she muttered to herself, trying to shake off the feeling of being watched. She moved deeper into the cemetery, reaching an area where the trees loomed overhead, casting dark shadows. There, she found a particularly old grave, its headstone worn and covered in moss. As she knelt to take a closer photo, she felt a cold breeze sweep through the area, chilling her to the bone. And then she heard it, a soft whisper, barely audible above the rustling leaves. "Help me!" Sarah froze, her heart racing. She looked around, but the cemetery was empty, the shadows stretching like fingers in the dim light. "Is anyone there?" she called, her voice shaking. No answer came, but the whispering grew louder, more urgent. "Help me, please." Gathering her courage, Sarah followed the sound, her flashlight beam dancing over the tombstones as she made her way deeper into the graveyard. The voice seemed to lead her toward a secluded corner, where an ancient oak tree stood guard over a cluster of graves. As she approached, the whispers became clearer. "I'm here. Please help." Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she noticed a figure standing just beyond the shadows of the tree. It was a woman, her features obscured by darkness, but her eyes glimmered with an otherworldly light. "Please," the woman implored, stepping closer. "You must help me." "What do you need?" Sarah asked, both terrified and captivated by the figure before her. "I was wronged. My spirit is trapped here. You must find my grave and set me free." The woman's voice trembled with emotion. "I cannot rest until my story is told." With a nod, Sarah promised to help. The woman pointed toward a distant part of the cemetery, where the moonlight illuminated a set of headstones that appeared older than the rest. "There, you'll find the answers you seek." Sarah hurried toward the indicated graves, her pulse quickening. As she reached the clearing, she could feel a heavy presence in the air. The gravestones were old and cracked, covered in thick vines. She scanned the names, her heart racing as she read one particular headstone that sent a chill down her spine. Margaret Eldridge, it read, the dates long faded. Below it, an inscription read, "Forever lost, may her soul find peace." A surge of energy washed over Sarah as she realized that this was the grave of the woman she had seen. "Margaret," she whispered, kneeling before the stone. "I'm here to help you." In that moment, the wind picked up, rustling the leaves overhead. The air grew thick with tension, and the ground beneath her seemed to vibrate. She took out her camera, determined to document this moment, but as she snapped a photo, a shadow darted across her lens. Startled, she looked up, and the figure of Margaret appeared before her, clearer now, her face a mask of anguish. "You must uncover the truth of my death," Margaret urged, her voice echoing like a lament. "Only then can I be free." Sarah nodded, fear mixing with determination. "How can I find out what happened?" Margaret pointed toward the oldest part of the cemetery, where the headstones were nearly buried under grass and vines. "There, you will find the answers." Steeling herself, Sarah made her way toward the old graves, the shadows around her deepening. As she approached, she stumbled upon a weathered stone that was partially buried in the ground. Kneeling, she began to dig around it, her heart racing. As the dirt fell away, she uncovered a plaque that read, "Here lies Thomas Eldridge, beloved husband and father." Confusion washed over her. Who was Thomas? Was he connected to Margaret's fate? Suddenly, Sarah felt a chill sweep through her, and a whisper echoed in her ear. "Find the truth. Reveal what was hidden." Determined, Sarah continued to dig, With each handful of dirt, her resolve grew stronger. Finally, she unearthed a small, weathered box. Her hands trembled as she opened it, revealing letters and a tarnished locket. The letters told a tale of love and betrayal. Margaret had been Thomas's beloved, but he had been unfaithful, and she had died in despair, her spirit tethered to the cemetery, unable to move on. Realizing the pain and injustice of her story, Sarah felt a wave of sorrow for the woman trapped between worlds. Taking a deep breath, she raised her voice. "Margaret, I have your letters. I will make sure your story is known." As the wind howled around her, Margaret's form flickered like a candle flame. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. "Tell the world, and I can finally rest." With that, the shadows that surrounded the graveyard began to recede, and a soft light enveloped Margaret, her form growing fainter. "You have freed me." As the last remnants of her spirit faded into the night, Sarah felt a warmth wash over her, replacing the cold dread that had gripped her heart. She knew she had fulfilled her promise. With the locket and letters in hand, Sarah left Elmwood Cemetery, vowing to share Margaret's story with the world. Though she had encountered darkness, she had also discovered the light of truth, ensuring that the lost would never be forgotten. As she walked away, the cemetery stood silent behind her, a place no longer haunted, but now a testament to the power of remembrance. In a quaint little town, tucked away from the bustling cities, there was an antique shop known as Whispers of Time. The shop was filled with trinkets and treasures from the past, each with a story to tell. Among these treasures was a peculiar silver doll, its eyes made of dark glass that seemed to follow you wherever you went. Locals avoided it, whispering tales of a curse that befell anyone who owned the doll. Samantha, a young art student with a fascination for the macabre, had always been drawn to the stories surrounding the doll. Intrigued, she decided to visit the shop one rainy afternoon. As she stepped inside, the bell above the door chimed softly, and she was greeted by the scent of old wood and musty pages. The shopkeeper, an elderly woman with kind eyes, noticed Samantha's interest in the silver doll. "Ah, you have an eye for unique pieces," she said, her voice low and gravelly. "But be warned, this doll is said to bring misfortune to those who dare to take it home." Samantha laughed it off, dismissing the warning as mere superstition. "I'll take my chances," she replied, unable to resist the doll's haunting beauty. After a brief negotiation, she purchased the doll and left the shop, her heart racing with excitement. That night, as she placed the doll on her bedside table, a sense of unease settled over her. Its glassy eyes seemed to glimmer in the moonlight, almost as if they were alive. Shaking off the feeling, Samantha turned off the light and drifted into a restless sleep. The following days brought strange occurrences. Items in her apartment began to go missing. Her keys, books, and even her favorite jacket vanished without explanation. Shadows flickered at the edges of her vision, and sometimes she could have sworn she heard a soft giggle echoing in the silence. Dismissing it as her imagination, Samantha tried to focus on her studies. But then came the nightmares. Each night she found herself trapped in a dark room, the silver doll sitting on a table in front of her, its eyes glowing menacingly. "Play with me," it would whisper, its voice like the rustling of leaves. She would wake up in a cold sweat, heart racing, convinced that something was very wrong. One evening, after a particularly vivid nightmare, Samantha decided to do some research on the doll. She found that it was believed to be the creation of a reclusive artist who had mysteriously disappeared years ago. Rumor had it that the doll was made as a vessel for the artist's tormented spirit, meant to grant wishes, but at a terrible cost. Determined to break the curse, Samantha sought the help of a local historian who specialized in the town's folklore. As she shared her experience, the historian's face grew serious. "The doll is not just an object, it holds the energy of its creator. If you wish to rid yourself of its influence, you must return it to its rightful place," he warned. "Where is that?" Samantha asked, feeling a sense of urgency. "The old artist's studio on the outskirts of town," he replied. "But be cautious. The spirit may not want to let go. That night, with the silver doll wrapped carefully in a cloth, Samantha set off for the studio. The path was overgrown and winding, illuminated only by the light of the moon. As she approached the dilapidated building, a chill ran down her spine. The studio was dark and silent, filled with forgotten canvases and scattered brushes. Taking a deep breath, Samantha stepped inside and placed the doll on a dusty table. "I return you to your creator," she said, her voice trembling. "May you find peace." As she turned to leave, the temperature in the room dropped, and the air thickened with tension. Shadows began to swirl around her, coalescing into a figure. A woman with wild hair and a sorrowful expression. It was the artist. "Why have you come?" the woman asked, her voice echoing like a whisper in the wind. I found your doll. It brought me nightmares and misfortune. I thought you might want it back," Samantha replied, trying to keep her voice steady. The artist's eyes softened and she stepped closer. "That doll holds my pain, my longing. It was never meant to harm, but it became a part of my suffering." Samantha felt a pang of sympathy. "I'm sorry for what happened to you, but it's causing harm to others now. You need to let it go." The artist hesitated, looking down at the doll. "I wanted to create beauty, but it twisted into something dark. Perhaps it is time to release it." With a flick of her wrist, the shadows swirled and the doll began to glow with a soft light. Samantha watched in awe as the energy from the doll flowed into the artist, illuminating her figure. "Thank you," the artist whispered, her voice now filled with warmth. "You have freed me from my own prison." As the light enveloped the room, Samantha felt a rush of energy, and suddenly, everything went still. The shadows dissipated and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. The artist smiled softly before fading into the light, taking the doll with her. Samantha stood alone in the now empty studio, feeling lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She had faced the darkness and helped a lost soul find peace. As she made her way back home, the night felt different, calmer and more serene. She knew that the curse of the silver doll was finally broken, and the stories of the past could now rest in peace. In a small coastal town shrouded in fog, there was an old lighthouse that had been abandoned for years. Locals claimed it was haunted by a spirit they called the Watcher, a ghostly figure who could be seen gazing out to sea on stormy nights. Rumor had it that the Watcher was the spirit of the last lighthouse keeper, a man who vanished without a trace, leaving only his journal behind. Marcus, a writer fascinated by ghost stories, decided to visit the lighthouse, hoping to uncover the truth behind the legend of the Watcher. Armed with only his notebook, flashlight, and a camera, he drove to the cliffs on a cold, misty night when the town lay silent under a thick blanket of fog. As he approached the lighthouse, it loomed out of the mist like a shadow from a forgotten time, tall and foreboding against the stormy sky. Its windows were broken, and the once bright paint had faded to a ghostly gray. Marcus felt a shiver run down his spine as he stepped through the rusted gate and onto the narrow path that led to the entrance. The inside of the lighthouse was dark and damp, filled with the scent of salt and decay. Each step echoed through the silence, and the walls seemed to close in on him as he climbed the winding staircase. With each step he could feel an unsettling presence, as though unseen eyes were watching him from the shadows. When he reached the top, he found the old keeper's room, a cramped space with a dusty desk, a cracked chair, and a single window overlooking the sea. On the desk lay the keeper's journal, its cover faded and brittle. Marcus opened it carefully, flipping through the yellowed pages until he found the last entry. October 12th. The light went out tonight. No matter what I try, it won't stay lit. Something is here, something that doesn't want the light. It watches me, always watching. Marcus felt a chill as he read the words, his mind racing with thoughts of what the keeper had experienced. He turned to look out the window, and in the distance he could see the dark waves crashing against the shore. A storm was brewing, the wind howling like a distant scream. Suddenly, a flash of movement caught his eye. There, on the rocks below, he saw a figure standing motionless, staring up at the lighthouse. The figure was shrouded in darkness, its form indistinct, but he could feel its gaze piercing through him. Marcus felt a strange pull, an urge to go down and confront the figure. He descended the staircase quickly, his footsteps echoing in the silence. As he reached the base of the lighthouse and stepped outside, the mist thickened, and the figure vanished. Undeterred, he walked toward the rocks, his flashlight cutting through the fog. The crashing waves grew louder, and the wind seemed to whisper his name. "Marcus!" He froze, his heart pounding. The voice was soft, almost gentle, but it carried a weight of sorrow and despair. "Marcus! Who's there?" he called, his voice trembling as he strained to see through the mist. For a moment, there was only silence, but then the figure reappeared, closer now. It was the shape of a man, his eyes empty and dark, his face gaunt and expressionless. "Why did you leave the light?" the figure asked, its voice barely above a whisper. Marcus stepped back, fear twisting in his gut. I don't understand. I'm just here to learn about the lighthouse." The figure took a step forward, its gaze locked onto his. "The light must stay on. It must always stay on. Without it, they cannot find their way." Suddenly, Marcus understood. The keeper had been responsible for guiding ships safely through the treacherous waters, but something had forced him to abandon his post. "I'll help you," Marcus said, his voice shaky but determined. "I'll turn the light back on." The figure's expression softened, and for a brief moment it almost looked grateful. Then, without another word, it vanished into the mist. Marcus hurried back to the lighthouse, climbing the stairs to the lantern room. He checked the mechanism, adjusting the levers and gears, and soon the light flickered to life, casting a warm glow over the stormy sea. As the light spun, illuminating the dark waters below, he felt a presence beside him. Turning, he saw the keeper standing there, watching the waves with a calm expression. "They're safe now," the keeper whispered, his voice no longer filled with sorrow. "Thank you." And with that, the keeper faded into the light, his spirit finally at peace. Marcus left the lighthouse that night, the storm fading as dawn broke over the horizon. The legend of the Watcher had come to an end, but the light would continue to shine, a beacon for those lost in the fog, guided by the memory of the silent Watcher who kept the darkness at bay. There was an old hotel at the edge of a small town, a place that had seen better days. It was mostly empty now, visited only by travelers passing through, and few people stayed longer than a night. Room 413 in particular had a reputation. Strange things had been reported over the years. Whispers, cold drafts, objects moving on their own. But the most disturbing thing of all was the mirror on the wall. People said that if you looked into the mirror for too long, you'd start to see things that shouldn't be there. Max, a writer on a deadline, didn't believe in superstitions or ghost stories. He checked into the hotel late one night, desperate for a quiet place to work. The receptionist gave him a strange look when he asked for a room, but handed him the key to room 413 with a small warning. "Don't stare at the mirror for too long. People say it does strange things." Max laughed it off, brushing aside the warning. He was too tired to care about ghost stories. All he wanted was a place to write without distractions. He took his bags upstairs, entered room 413, and set up his laptop on the small wooden desk by the bed. The room was simple, with faded wallpaper, a creaky bed, and a single mirror on the wall opposite the bed. The mirror was large, framed in tarnished silver, and slightly dusty, as though no one had cleaned it in years. It had a strange, almost magnetic quality. Every time Max glanced around the room, his eyes were drawn to it. Settling in, Max began to write. Hours passed, and as midnight approached, he felt his eyelids grow heavy. Just as he was about to drift off, he heard a soft creak from somewhere in the room. Startled, he looked up, but saw nothing out of place. Shaking his head, he chalked it up to the old building's quirks and went back to his work. But then, he noticed something in the mirror. It was faint, like a shadow moving in the background. He glanced over his shoulder, but the room was empty. Unnerved, he turned back to his work, trying to ignore the feeling that he wasn't alone. As the hours dragged on, strange things began to happen. His belongings started shifting slightly, his pen rolling across the desk, his papers rustling even though the windows were closed. He told himself it was just the wind, the creaky old building, but a nagging feeling told him something was wrong. Then, just past 2 a.m., he looked up and froze. There, in the mirror, was a figure standing behind him, a woman with dark, hollow eyes, her face twisted in an expression of sorrow. She was wearing an old-fashioned dress, and her hair hung in damp, tangled strands around her face. Max spun around, but there was no one there. Heart pounding, he looked back at the mirror. The woman was gone. He took a deep breath, convincing himself it was a trick of the light, exhaustion playing tricks on his mind. But he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. He tried to get back to work, but the silence weighed heavily on him. Every few minutes, he found himself glancing at the mirror, half expecting to see her again. Finally, unable to concentrate, he got up and covered the mirror with a towel from the bathroom. Satisfied, he returned to his desk, feeling a small sense of relief. But as he settled back into his chair, he heard a soft, whispering voice. "Why did you cover the mirror?" Max's blood ran cold. The voice was coming from behind him, soft and sad. Slowly, he turned, but the room was empty. Shaking, he tried to ignore it, telling himself he was imagining things. But the whisper came again, louder this time. "Look at me." Against his better judgment, he pulled the towel off the mirror. The woman was there, her face pressed against the glass as if trying to push through it. Her eyes were filled with desperation. "Help me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Max felt paralyzed, unable to look away. What do you want?" he managed to stammer. She reached out, her hand pressed against the glass, her fingers moving as though trying to grasp his. "I'm trapped," she said, "in this mirror. Please, help me find peace." Max didn't know what to do. He felt drawn to her, his heart aching with a strange sadness he couldn't explain. Without thinking, he reached out, placing his hand against the glass where hers was. For a moment, he felt an icy chill seep through his skin, and his vision blurred. When he blinked, he found himself standing in a strange, dimly lit room. He looked around in confusion, realizing he was no longer in room 413. Instead, he was in a space that seemed endless, filled with shadows and fog. And there, standing in front of him, was the woman from the mirror. "Thank you for freeing me," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. "But now, you must take my place." Max's heart raced as he backed away, but he found himself unable to move, his feet rooted to the ground. The woman's face twisted into a smile, her hollow eyes gleaming with something dark and menacing. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. The fog swirled around him, and he felt himself being pulled back, as though he were sinking into the glass. The next morning, the hotel's cleaning staff entered room 413 and found it empty. Max's belongings were scattered around the room, but there was no sign of him. The only strange thing was the mirror. In its glassy surface, they saw something new. A faint reflection of a man's face, eyes wide with terror, forever trapped in a silent scream. And from that day on, those who stayed in room 413 would sometimes glimpse a figure in the mirror, a man watching them, unable to escape. When Emma's grandmother passed away, she inherited her old Victorian house on the outskirts of town. The house was beautiful, but had always been a source of mystery. It was filled with strange items her grandmother had collected over the years, and Emma was excited to explore every corner. But one room in particular, the attic, had been off limits for as long as she could remember. No one was allowed up there, and her grandmother had always been oddly protective of it. On her first night in the house, curiosity got the better of her. She decided to take a look in the attic, hoping to find some forgotten treasures. The door to the attic was at the end of a long, narrow hallway, hidden behind an old tapestry. She pushed the tapestry aside, revealing a small, creaky door with a rusty lock. To her surprise, the lock fell off easily, and the door swung open with a groan. The attic was dark and filled with dust, with only a single window that let in a sliver of moonlight. As Emma's eyes adjusted, she noticed dozens of strange objects lining the shelves: antique dolls, faded photographs, and peculiar trinkets. But what caught her attention was a large, ornate mirror standing against the far wall, its frame covered in intricate carvings. Drawn to it, she walked over and looked into the mirror. Her reflection stared back, but there was something strange about it. The air around her grew colder, and she felt an odd sensation, as if the room itself was watching her. Just as she was about to turn away, she noticed movement in the corner of her eye, a dark figure standing just behind her reflection. She whipped around, but the attic was empty. Heart pounding, she looked back at the mirror, but the figure was gone. Emma told herself it was just her imagination, brought on by the eerie atmosphere of the attic. But as she prepared to leave, she heard a faint whisper, soft and almost inaudible. She couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like someone calling her name. Rattled, she quickly closed the attic door and hurried back downstairs, telling herself she'd imagined the whole thing. But as the days passed, strange things began happening around the house. She would find objects in different places, doors would creak open on their own, and at night, she could hear faint footsteps above her coming from the attic. One evening, after another night of strange noises, she decided to go back to the attic to see if she could find the source. This time, she brought a flashlight, determined to find some rational explanation. As she entered the attic, the air felt heavier, colder. She shined the flashlight around, illuminating the dusty shelves and forgotten relics. But when the beam of light passed over the mirror, she froze. There, in the reflection, stood a shadowy figure, watching her with hollow eyes. Emma felt her heart race as the figure moved closer, its form becoming clearer. It was a woman, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, her face pale and expressionless. "Why, are you here?" the figure whispered, her voice barely above a breath. Emma stumbled backward, nearly dropping the flashlight. I live here now," she stammered, her voice shaking. "This was my grandmother's house." The figure's eyes narrowed, a flicker of sadness crossing her face. "She kept me here," the woman said, "trapped in this mirror. I only wanted freedom." Emma took a step closer, drawn to the sadness in the woman's voice. "What happened to you?" she asked, her fear momentarily replaced by curiosity. "I was her friend. Once," the woman replied. "But when I fell ill, she turned to dark things to try to save me. She trapped my spirit here, hoping to keep me close forever." A shiver ran down Emma's spine as the woman's words sank in. Her grandmother had always been fascinated by the supernatural, but Emma never imagined it went this far. Can I help you?" Emma asked, unsure of what else to say. The woman's face softened, and she reached out a hand, her fingers barely brushing the surface of the mirror. "Break the mirror," she whispered. "Set me free." Emma hesitated, but then nodded. She grabbed a small antique chair from the corner of the attic, lifted it, and swung it toward the mirror with all her strength. The glass shattered, fragments scattering across the floor. In that moment, the room filled with a cold wind, and the woman's form began to dissolve, her features softening into a peaceful smile. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice fading into the wind. And then, she was gone. The house felt different after that, lighter, as if a heavy weight had been lifted. The strange noises stopped, and the unsettling feeling of being watched vanished. Emma felt a sense of peace, knowing she had helped someone find rest. But every now and then, when she looked into another mirror, she would catch a glimpse of the woman's face, watching her with gratitude from the other side. When Ethan moved into his new apartment, he was thrilled. It was an old building, with high ceilings and antique fixtures. and it had an old-world charm that appealed to him. But he quickly noticed something unusual about the place, an odd, almost musical hum that seemed to come from the walls. At first he brushed it off as the building settling or old pipes rattling, but the noise didn't go away. In fact, every night around midnight, the humming would grow louder, almost like a soft, ghostly voice murmuring in a strange melody. One night, when the hum was especially loud, Ethan decided to investigate. Armed with his phone flashlight, he walked through the dimly lit rooms, listening closely. The sound seemed to come from behind the walls, almost like someone was whispering just out of reach. He placed his ear to the wall, his pulse quickening as he heard a faint voice. It was soft, but he could make out the words, "Help me, please, find me." Ethan's blood ran cold. He pulled back, staring at the wall in shock. It was impossible, he thought. There had to be a logical explanation. He tried to shake off the fear and went back to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. The voice echoed in his mind, haunting him. The following night, the whispering started again, more insistent this time. Ethan lay in bed, clutching his blanket until he couldn't stand it anymore. He got up, following the sound until he reached a section of the wall near his closet. With a mix of fear and curiosity, he tapped on the wall. The voice paused for a moment, then resumed, louder this time. "Help me, please." Heart racing, Ethan decided he had to know what was behind the wall. Grabbing a small hammer from his toolkit, he carefully began tapping at the wall, loosening the plaster until he created a small hole. As he broke through, a rush of cold air poured out, sending chills down his spine. He peered into the darkness of the wall cavity, shining his flashlight inside. At first, he saw nothing but dust and old wiring. But then, something caught his eye, a small, crumpled piece of fabric poking out from a narrow gap. He reached in, his fingers brushing against something soft. Pulling it out, he realized it was a faded, tattered scarf, covered in dust and dirt. A chill ran down his spine as he held it in his hands, wondering how it ended up there. As he examined the scarf, the voice came again, this time right next to his ear. "Please, don't leave me alone." Ethan stumbled backward, his heart pounding. The voice was closer now, almost as if the person was standing right beside him. He looked around the room, but he was alone. The next day, he did some research on the building, hoping to find answers. What he discovered sent shivers down his spine. Years ago, a young woman had gone missing in the building. She had lived in his apartment and no one ever found her. Determined to uncover the truth, Ethan returned to the wall that night, widening the hole he had made. As he worked, the voice grew louder, filled with desperation. "Please, find me, please." Finally, he reached a larger cavity in the wall, his flashlight illuminating a small space hidden within. His breath caught as he saw what was inside, a bundle of old bones, covered in a faded dress. A chill settled over him as he realized what he had found. The voice grew soft, almost relieved. "Thank you," it whispered before fading into silence. Ethan called the authorities, and they confirmed that the remains belonged to the missing woman. After that night, the whispering stopped, and the apartment felt different, calmer, as if a restless spirit had finally found peace. Though Ethan stayed in the apartment, he never forgot the voice in the walls, and he often wondered if she had been waiting all those years, hoping someone would listen. Lily grew up in a small town surrounded by dark, dense woods and a large, murky lake that the locals avoided after dark. There was a story passed down for generations, a legend of a lantern that would appear by the lake on misty nights, held by the spirit of a woman who never made it home. They called her the Lady of the Lake. The legend went that she'd been lost in the woods, trying to reach her village, and slipped into the lake one cold autumn night. Her lantern was the last thing anyone saw, bobbing on the water's surface before it vanished. Since then, every few years, people would report seeing the faint glow of her lantern near the lake. But when they tried to follow it, they'd find nothing but darkness. One misty autumn evening, Lily and her friends decided to explore the lake. They were drawn by the mystery, daring each other to go closer and see if they could spot the legendary lantern. As they reached the lake's edge, the water was eerily still, and a dense fog rolled in, shrouding everything in an unnatural quiet. They waited, whispering and laughing nervously, when suddenly a faint light appeared across the lake. It was distant, barely visible through the mist, but unmistakable. The pale glow of a lantern swaying gently in the darkness. One of her friends, Jake, laughed, thinking it was someone playing a prank. "Come on, let's go check it out," he said, heading toward the light. But Lily hesitated, feeling a strange chill. The light seemed to grow closer, as though it was moving toward them. I don't think we should," she said, her voice shaky. But her friends were already moving toward it, drawn to the glow. As they walked closer, the light stopped moving. It hung in the mist, waiting. They could make out a faint figure behind it, a woman with long dark hair, her face obscured by shadows. She stood motionless, her lantern casting an eerie glow around her. "Who are you?" Jake called out, trying to sound brave. But the woman didn't answer. She simply lifted the lantern higher, its light flickering as though inviting them closer. Against her better judgment, Lily followed her friends as they stepped closer to the woman, feeling a strange pull, as if something was drawing her toward the water's edge. Suddenly, the woman's face became visible, her eyes hollow and sorrowful, her expression full of despair. She lifted a hand, pointing toward the lake, and her lips moved silently as if trying to say something. Lily froze, sensing that this was no prank or harmless legend. She wanted to turn back, to run, but her feet felt rooted to the ground. The woman's gaze shifted to her, piercing through the mist, and in that moment, Lily heard a soft voice in her mind. "Help me. I am lost." The lantern's light dimmed, flickering, and the woman turned toward the water, gliding silently over the lake's surface. Lily's friends didn't seem to notice the woman's strange, ghostly movements. They were still laughing, thinking it was a thrill. But Lily knew something was wrong. She felt it in her bones, a deep, unsettling fear. "We need to leave," she whispered, tugging at her friends' arms. But they ignored her. The woman continued to move, gliding farther across the lake, her lantern slowly fading. Lily's friends followed, laughing and calling out, but as they reached the water's edge, the woman stopped. She looked back, her face twisted with sorrow and anger, and her voice echoed in Lily's mind once more. "Come, with me." In an instant, her friends' laughter turned to screams as they felt an unseen force pulling them toward the lake, their feet slipping on the muddy shore. Lily grabbed Jake's arm, pulling him back, but her other friends stumbled into the water, their faces pale with terror. The woman's face grew darker, her hollow eyes fixed on them, her hand reaching out as if to drag them down. The lake water surged, icy and dark, pulling at their legs. With all her strength, Lily yanked her friends away from the water, their feet stumbling backward. The woman's lantern flickered, and she let out a wail, her voice echoing across the lake. The mist thickened, swallowing her form until the lantern was the only thing visible, slowly sinking beneath the water's surface. They ran, not stopping until they were back on solid ground, far from the lake's edge. Breathless and shaking, they looked back, but the lake was dark and still once more, the lantern gone. Since that night, Lily never went near the lake again. She knew that the Lady of the Lake was still there, waiting with her lantern, searching for those who would follow her into the darkness, never to return. Mark was a taxi driver who worked the late shift, picking up passengers around town. He had seen it all: drunk revelers, exhausted workers, quiet night owls. But there was one night he could never forget. A night when he picked up a passenger who left him with chills that lasted for days. It was nearly 3 a.m., and Mark was about to end his shift when he saw a woman standing alone on the corner of an empty street. She was dressed in an old-fashioned coat, her long dark hair covering most of her face. Something about her looked out of place, but Mark figured she just needed a ride like anyone else. He pulled over, and she silently slipped into the back seat, settling into the shadows. She didn't give a destination, so he asked, "Where to?" "Just drive," she whispered, her voice so soft that it barely filled the car. Mark shrugged and began driving, figuring she'd tell him eventually. But as they drove through the quiet streets, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She didn't move, didn't make a sound, and he couldn't see her face in the mirror, just a shadowy figure in the back seat. After a few minutes of tense silence, he tried to start a conversation to break the uncomfortable quiet. "Long night?" he asked. The woman didn't respond, but he could feel her eyes on him, watching intently. His hands gripped the steering wheel, and a shiver ran down his spine. There was something about her presence that felt cold, unnatural. As they passed through a darkened neighborhood, he noticed in the rearview mirror that her head was tilted slightly, as if she were looking out the window. Then, out of nowhere, she spoke, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Do you know where they are?" Mark frowned, glancing back in confusion. "Where who are?" But she didn't respond. She simply continued to stare out the window, her face still hidden. His unease grew, and he realized he was gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. As they drove on, he started to notice that the streetlights flickered as they passed, each one dimming until they were surrounded by darkness. He felt a chill settle over the car, as though the temperature had dropped by several degrees. "Where are they?" she whispered again, this time sounding more desperate. Mark's heart pounded. I don't know what you mean," he stammered, glancing nervously into the mirror. But the woman just stared back at him, her face still obscured by shadows. Desperate to end this eerie ride, Mark pulled over and turned to her. "Look, this is as far as I go," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. I think you should get out." For a moment she didn't move. Then, slowly, she leaned forward, and her face came into the dim light. Mark's blood turned to ice. Her eyes were hollow, her skin pale and gray, like someone who hadn't seen sunlight in years. And her expression was one of deep, unending sadness. "Do you know where they are?" she asked one last time, her voice breaking. Mark swallowed, unable to look away from her empty eyes. I don't know who you're looking for," he managed to whisper. She held his gaze for a moment longer, and he thought he saw a flicker of disappointment in her hollow eyes. Then, without another word, she opened the door and stepped out of the car, disappearing into the night without a sound. Shaken, Mark sat there for a few minutes, trying to collect himself. When he looked back, she was gone, vanished into thin air. He drove off quickly, his hands still trembling on the wheel, hoping to put as much distance between himself and that corner as possible. The next day, he told a few other drivers about the strange encounter. One of the older drivers went pale and nodded knowingly. "You've met her, then?" the man said in a low voice. "They say she's a ghost, searching for her family, lost in some accident decades ago. Drivers see her sometimes, always asking the same question, but no one knows where they went, and no one who's seen her ever forgets." Mark never drove that route again, and he often glanced in the rearview mirror, dreading the day he might see her face staring back at him once more. Thank you for joining me on this journey tonight. I hope you found some peace and comfort. Before you drift off completely, let me know in the comments what time it is, where you are, and which country you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories. Until next time, rest well and sweet dreams.